definitely walk-in shot at some point.
So sorry if people can already see us. I'm just figuring out if we're on screen. Yeah, we're here. Okay, amazing. So welcome back everybody to the National Creative Writing Industry Conference. This is our third free panel of the event, and it is Meet the Literary Agents. So I have 3 agents with me today, and an author who has been published, well, she's published 3 novels, so she's well aware of the relationship that goes on between agent and writer. I have Abby Fellows from the Good Literary Agency, who represent underrepresented writers. I have Clare Coombes from the Liverpool Literary Agency, who primarily represent Northern writers, and they've very recently established themselves. It's very exciting. And I have Silé Edwards from Mushens Entertainment. And the panel is going to be chaired by Sarah Butler, who has published 3 novels with Picador, and I believe is agented at Curtis Brown. Sarah, is that right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Amazing. So these guys are going to talk today about, they're going to discuss the process of submissions, the way that they kind of work with the manuscripts that are submitted to them, how they work with their writers, how writers can best contact and pitch to them, etc., etc. I am going to disappear into the background as usual, and I will come back up at 11:45 to field your questions. So any questions that you have for the panel throughout the talk, please just put them in the live chat box on YouTube. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Zoe. Thanks to Common Press and MMU. So I am Sarah Butler. I'm a novelist and I'm also a lecturer at the Writing School at MMU. So it's great to be chairing this panel, and we've got 3 brilliant agents, I think, all with really interesting and different takes on agenting. So I always think these events are brilliant because sometimes I remember when I was an unpublished writer, it felt like that the agent is this kind of holy grail that you're desperate to get to, but also feeling like they were a very, very long way away, and not always knowing the best way to contact them and the best and who to contact and how to do it and when to do it. So I think it's going to be a really interesting hour, just getting some real insights into the industry and what people are looking for and how to get to the Holy Grail. And I know that there are also a lot of, I think, publishing is changing a lot. We might want to touch on that a bit in terms of there are different routes in, and there's, self-publishing is much more acceptable and all the rest of it. But I think that agents still play a really incredibly useful and important role as this kind of in between the writer and the editor. So what I'm going to do is just ask each of our brilliant panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their agency, but also how they got into agenting and maybe what they love about it. Let's maybe go in alphabetical order. So Claire, can I ask you to kick off, please?
Yeah, so I'm Claire from the Liverpool Literary Agency, and we are only a few months old. And our background is that we were editors first, and we were working with a diverse range of clients. So there'd be NHS workers, taxi drivers, academics, people who'd done creative writing degrees, people who hadn't. And we started to realise that one thing everybody had in common was that they thought the publishing industry was inaccessible, very London-centric, they weren't quite sure what their place was in it. So especially when everything happened in March with lockdown, we started to think, okay, what are these barriers? And the barriers seem to be contacts and cost. So how can we break that down? And then we were researching and we realised, actually, there isn't a literary agency in Liverpool. And we know a lot of writers through our work with Writing on the Wall. We work with underrepresented groups to edit anthologies, to run writing workshops. We can make sure that we link these underrepresented writers to commissioning editors and publishers. Now, there was a report out as well, the Common People report, Breaking the Class Ceiling in Publishing, which I would say is a really important one for people to look at, because that inspired us, because it was very much about the fact that there needs to be more regional agencies, there needs to be more accessibility, transparency, and more sort of, careers as well beyond the writing. So a lot of the writers we work with, we try and encourage them to look at internships that are now becoming increasingly paid and more remote, so you don't have to be in London, alongside making sure that we're sort of the gatekeeper, but we're also telling them how open it is and how friendly it is, and how it's not sort of this, really inaccessible, far, distant London place. It's open and there are opportunities.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. That's so great to hear as well. Silé, I think you and your cat might want to tell us a little
Yes, I think she realised I was coming to talk about books again, and was like, yes, I'd like to also hear some things. So she's joined us. I'm Silé. I work at Mushens Entertainment. I'm a literary agent, and I've been at Mushens Entertainment for just over a month now. I think this is kind of coming to the end of month 2. And before that, I was at Curtis Brown supporting a literary agent there. And I mean, I'm not sure what else I should really say about that. I'm building a list of non-fiction predominantly, with some fiction writers as well. I'm working with people who have really great stories to tell and are putting those ideas into books. And that's really exciting.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Abby, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
So, hello, I'm Abby. I'm at the Good Literary Agency, which was founded in 2018 specifically to create a space for writers who have historically been underrepresented by the publishing industry. I joined in March last year. My list is fairly broad. I don't really work on picture books, but aside from that, I work on children's books from middle grade upwards and adult books, fiction and non-fiction.
Great, thank you. So I thought I might just start with a kind of a sort of personal question about why you became agents and what you love about it. And I think it's a really interesting thing to hear about, because I know when I kind of slipped through, it felt like I slipped through this huge brick wall that I've been banging on for about 10 years. And when I finally got published, I met a lot of publishers and agents, and I was like, oh, these are just people who love books and are desperate for new stories and are excited about stuff. Whereas it felt before I'd kind of found that connection, it sometimes felt like, oh, there are these people who don't want to listen to me and don't want to publish my book. And so I just think it'd be really nice to hear about kind of what it is that excites you. I mean, Claire, maybe you've already touched on this a bit, but in kind of like, yeah, what you love about agenting, and maybe also you could touch on what kind of things that do excite you when you get them. Let's do the same order, just for...
Yeah, I mean, I really love seeing the creativity that's coming out of the region, that's coming out of the north, and we're quite broad at the moment with themes that we're looking at, things from historical fiction right through to crime and psychological thrillers. The reason we're not accepting children and non-fiction at the moment is because just of capacity, as we build, we like to sort of have that in, but I found it's quite a specific area. What I've loved seeing is, people giving us messages but without preaching. So, you can get a crime novel, for example, that has a really strong message about social inequality in it, but the plot is hooking people in. You can get something, from women's fiction that looks at issues to do with, feminism, but it's not just going over and teaching someone. I love how writers are weaving this in, and the passion behind it and the reasons that people want to tell these stories. And I think that it doesn't matter what gender they're writing from, or race or class. There's always something in the background behind the story about why they want to get this message out there. And I'm just like so amazed at the quality of the things we've had, and that sort of moral compass people have as well, to be like, I want this message out there.
Really interesting, thank you. And Silé, what about you? What is it that drew you to agenting, and what is it that you love about agenting, but also that you look for in submissions?
I think it's quite similar to what you said, Claire. It's working with people who have this message that they want to share, and share it through a story, or because I do a lot of non-fiction, through book, and it's wanting to be there at that stage that is when the idea is like a nugget of gold, and you have to kind of really get to it and get it out of all of the other thoughts that might be kind of tangled up in there. And it's also about advocating. I have a grounding in traditional agenting, so I kind of know how it works and how the different parts of the publishing machine move together. And for a lot of authors that I'm working with, they haven't seen that before. They don't know how that works. And so being there at that critical stage to advocate for them and explain things and make sure that they're getting the best out of their publishing experience is really why I was drawn to agenting, rather than other parts of publishing that I've worked in before.
Nice, thank you. Abby, what about you?
Yeah, I really, really strongly agree with that about advocacy. I think that's a really important role that we have as agents. For me, it's like the perfect blend of being an introvert who just loves to read and an extrovert who loves to chat, mostly about books. So having worked in lots of different bits of the industry, the thing that drew me back to agenting, having left it for a bit, was just sort of wanting to be there to support people for that whole process and use the contacts that I built up and the networks and the things that I'd learned just to support as many people as possible, because I think as an agency, we're incredibly opaque. It's really hard to navigate it. It's really hard to understand how to get in the first place, but kind of beyond that, sort of what everything means at each stage. So the thing that really motivates me is kind of being able to support people to kind of go through that whole journey.
Nice. It's almost like you're translators, isn't it? You're kind of and intermediaries.
Yeah.
And that leads on quite nicely to my next question. So I was going to talk about that process. So I'm wondering if, I mean, maybe not all of you, but maybe you could take some different, one could volunteer, or you could take some different bits and add to each other's things. But in terms of that process of, you know, from submission of a manuscript to you through to hopefully publication and beyond, I guess, to maybe just kind of demystify that a little bit for people to kind of just spell out this sort of different steps. So I don't know if does anyone want to start?
I don't mind, because I feel like I'm being demystified right now. Do you know it, like, as the time
okay
as we're going. So what's really great about it is that because we're so new, and you know, I've published books before, and I've worked with agents, and I've been in marketing and PR, and I've, you know, kind of built up those relationships. But to me, at the moment, with working through our first contracts, I'm realizing step by step people are supportive in the industry, people want you to do well. And my role as an agent is to be like, okay, here's the submission, you know, make sure the submission's right. And then if it needs something like, you know, some tweaks, point of view, things like that, I build up a relationship with the author, because I think it becomes like a friendship. And then I will give them those tips. But equally, if we don't think we can take something on, we give people a bit of feedback and signpost them somewhere else, because we don't, there's a lot of reasons, and it's not necessarily the writing, and I want people to go away with something from the submission. And then I find that we work together to get it exactly right. And then I will be thinking in my head, who is the commissioning editor that I've been speaking to? Who have I researched? Who have I built up a relationship with? I have an Excel spreadsheet, like a very geeky thing of, like, you know, commissioning editors I've spoke to, what they're looking for. And I love putting the pitch together for a writer. Do you know, just those few lines, paragraph, just about here's why it's exciting and here's why you want to read it, and making sure it gets to the right person. And I love that side. And then, you know, you go into the contract stage and you're like, why does it feel like I'm in law now? You know, it's just kind of like navigating your way through like law speak and for a contract, and then looking at the next stage plans for the release dates. It's all really exciting, but it's nice to be able to let the writer concentrate on their writing, and you guide them and kind of take on that sort of side work for them as well.
Yeah. I have to say that one of my favorite things about having an agent is having someone else bigging up my work, because I can't do it. Like, I'm used to surround pictures, and I find that whole like, oh yeah, it's because it's great because of da da da. I'm like, ugh. So I think that thing of having someone else who's your advocate is really powerful. I think, and I think a lot of writers, myself, but I think I know a lot of others, are quick to undersell ourselves. So it's great having people cheerleading. Silé and Abby, have you got anything to add in terms of that, the sort of process and things you think would be useful and interesting for writers to know about?
I think just off the back of what you said, just that sort of feeling of I just, you know, sort of being there for the writer. So sometimes, like, you know, it's a phone call or a text that just goes, Abby, I'm going to throw my laptop out the window. I'm setting fire to the manuscript. I'm a terrible writer. You know, having that person who's been there from the start saying, you've got this, you can do this, you're brilliant, and talking it through. I think, you know, that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes as an agent, but that's sort of hopefully that kind of underpinning of moral support, but also being the person who says, you know, this isn't working, or have you thought about this, or, you know, maybe we should steer it this way. That sort of interrogation and being a critical friend to someone is really key as well.
Yeah. To add to the selling yourself short as a writer thing, it's a really interesting thing I found with a lot of authors I've worked with, thinking that something's too ambitious, or it's not quite possible, or you know, that publishing house, that editor, oh, they'd never want to see my work. And so just really explaining that actually it is all possible, and it's something that's, you know, almost nothing, I mean, with slight terms and conditions apply, almost nothing is impossible. You can do anything. And being able to be that voice of, you know, hope and excitement is always really great. And Juliet and Liza are really good at doing blogs and other types of posts on our website, just to like demystify that process even more, working with an agent.
Nice. So that's on Mushens Entertainment website. People can take a look at that. Brilliant. And I've got so many questions. I'm trying to work out which ones to ask first. So I remember back when I was trying to get an agent, a friend of mine who was an agent, and he said the good thing about having an agent is that, you know, editors might change and move. I mean, I know agents move as well, but generally you might end up with quite a few editors or publishing houses in your life. But ideally you'd have this, you know, one agent or agency that will kind of take you through your whole career. And he was talking about, you know, this idea of kind of career development and I guess that thing of being on a team, because writing's a lonely old business, isn't it, really, particularly novels, or any books, actually, full-length books. So, I mean, do you see that in terms of your kind of working with your writers, not just on one specific book, but that it's a kind of longer-term relationship? Does that chime with how you guys work?
Yeah, definitely. I want to kind of look at it as a career, you know, career authors, and see, you know, what, because a lot of them are coming to us and they've already done like a series, or they finished one book and they've outlined another. So I just want to kind of fit together who they are as a writer and how that's marketed as well as the first book. So what's the link between all the work that they're doing if it's not a series? Or for a debut author, let's see how this first book does, but me as an agent, keep in mind that I've got the second book ready. Alongside what I mentioned before about seeing if there are opportunities for them to work within publishing, so that they kind of feel like they're putting their writing and their editing skills that they've picked up as writers to good use, and it's a career.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I love working with people. I love working with people who want to write and who want to say something about what they know or about the world, or, you know, just to write really good stories. So I think when you work with people like that, there's always going to be another book in whatever form it is. They're always going to want to write something else, which is really lovely.
Yeah. And in terms of, so I had an interesting conversation with someone recently, and she's a very talented writer, and she'd won a competition, and some agents have contacted her and said, when you're ready, send stuff. And then, so this was maybe 2 or so years ago, and she said, oh, I can't really get back in touch with them because it's been ages and I feel really bad. And I was trying to say that I don't think that's the case at all, but I've heard that from, she's not the only person who said that to me, or sort of felt like, oh, well, I met this person, but it was 5 years ago, and they're going to think I'm an idiot if I send it now because it's been too long. Or so I'm interested in maybe your comments on when is a good time to send, in terms of, so as a writer approaching an agent for the first time, like what is the optimum moment, if that makes sense? So I guess when it's ready to send. And then I'm also quite interested in when you guys know it's ready to send it to the next stage, because it feels like, you know, there's this, it's like not a conveyor belt, and makes it sound a bit boring, but there's a kind of, you know, the writer gets to the agent, and then there's this kind of other stage that is the agent getting it to the editors. So I keep asking 2 questions at the same time, but so interested in when should a writer send it, but also then interested in kind of what you would then potentially do with the work and when you know it's ready to send to the world. And Abby, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, sure. First off, I wouldn't be horrified at all if someone waited, you know, a few years. It takes the time it takes. So, you know, that's natural. That's fine. In terms of when it's ready, I think that you have to feel that you've done as much as you can on your own. So whether that's, you know, not everybody has access to creative writing schools, and we wouldn't expect that. But if you've had feedback from peers, or, you know, there's some great kind of writer communities where you've had like your beta readers give you some tips, and you've edited it, and you really feel like you can't do any more on your own. I'm certainly not looking for a polished manuscript. I'm looking for something I see potential in, that I feel I can have an impact on, and I can support the writer to get it as good as it needs to be for submission. And in terms of us knowing, I think that it's a sort of instinct thing, but you just feel that you've kind of got it to a point where you're really, really excited about it, and it's time to share it. And I think there's always, you want to keep a bit in the tank, because inevitably an editor will request some changes or have some ideas. So you don't want to ever exhaust a writer. There needs to be scope for them to edit some more when they hopefully get their deal and their editor.
That's really interesting, the bit in the tank, because I know that bit in the tank.
Yeah.
When you're like, I can't do anymore. And actually you're right, because it's interesting, isn't it? There's like all the work it takes to send it to an agent, and then all the work it takes to get sent to submission, and then all the work you get if you get a deal. So it is a lot of editing, isn't it? Which can be fun and exciting and makes it better.
Hopefully.
But yeah. Silé, Claire, have you got any thoughts in terms of when you feel people should, I'm doing that inverted commas, submit, at what point?
Yeah, I think sometimes the mistake that people might make is just sending it too early on, so they finish it and they're like, I finished, off it goes, because it's the excitement of having finished it. And as Abby said, it's not necessarily having access to courses that you might have to pay for. It's more about, you can go online and find beta readers. If you can afford to get an editor to do some structural edits, your peers, there's different, even just leaving it for a while and then coming back to read it again. And because some of the things that I see sometimes that might be easily ironed out are very consistent sort of grammar and punctuation errors. And sometimes I think that would make me think, oh, that's going to take a long time for me to sort of get into the writer's head. And, things like that can be solved if you just had a few other people looking at it for you, pointed it out. And then we're not receiving a manuscript that kind of is a little bit too rough. And at the same time, it's not making writers feel that there's any rush, that they don't have to sort of put their other their lives on hold. You can get in touch with agents at any point, and that's fine. Don't worry if it's been left for months or a year. That's absolutely fine. But just give yourself some space with the manuscript first.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I'd say as long as your approach is polite and friendly and understanding, and the agent's also open to submissions at the time, there's never a bad time to send your work in. It's all about the approach and about the relationship you had before as well. So if you were speaking to the agent and it was all quite tentative and early stages, then kind of jumping in a super, super friendly and familiar way might not be the right approach. But equally, if you had a really good, strong relationship before and then a little bit of time's elapsed, then kind of jumping in and just saying, I've been on hiatus for this reason, and here's my work, I'd love for you to take a look, then that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So maybe I'd quite like you to expand on that a little bit. So I'm just in terms of how we approach as writers, how we approach agents, and what kind of maybe what's a total no and like maybe what kind of things put you off, and what kind of things make you go, oh, actually I'm gonna turn this, I'm gonna go from this cover letter straight to the manuscript, and I'm sort of primed to like it, if that makes sense. Because I think obviously you guys get a lot of submissions, and so I'm imagining you make very quick decisions, even on a sort of unconscious emotional level. So I'm just interested in what tips you would give to writers to both do or not do.
A lot of agents say this, but it's so important, is do your research. And even if that research is only looking at the specific agent's guidelines, so no one's going to submit to just one agent. We all understand that and we know that. But even if you are submitting to 8, 10, 12 people, you should get everybody's name right in their individual emails, get their submissions right. So some people might ask for an attachment of a synopsis and the attachment of the actual manuscript. Some people want to see the full straight away. Some people want to see the first 3 chapters. So just making sure that you're submitting the right thing to the right people with the right name. And if there's more than one agent at the agency, check if they're happy to receive submissions together. So, there might be 4 or 5 or more agents at an agency. Just make sure that if you want to send your work into more than one, that's okay. Because a lot of us will talk to our colleagues and will, if something's really good, but not necessarily for us, we might say, oh, do you want to have a look? So it can be quite awkward internally if it's like, oh, well, I also got that too, and that's never fun. So just making sure that the guidelines are always followed, that people's names are correct, and that they're looking for the thing you're submitting. So if an agent's looking for children's and YA and you've written a really amazing adult thriller, they're probably not going to take it on. So just making sure that you're always aware.
Yeah. And in terms of I've completely lost it, what I was going to say. Anyway, we'll move on. I'll come back to it. It'll be in my head somewhere, hiding. Claire and Abby, any thoughts again on things that either immediately excite you or sort of immediately put you off?
Submissions wise, we have the guidelines on there, and it's we give a guide to how to do a synopsis. So it's about make sure you get that right, because a lot of people will mix up a synopsis and a blurb, and I kind of get that. But that's why we've sort of put in our guidelines, here's a link to what we think is a good synopsis template and guidance. And it's when people, like we say to them, it's not based on the quality of your writing, it's not based on, it's just we have a 12-week time frame to get back in touch, because we've got so much on and so many submissions. And we've only had it the odd time, but when somebody will get back in touch and go, well, can you let me know sooner rather than later? And it's kind of like, well, no. And also we have said that you can submit to other agencies at the same time. Just let us know if you get picked up. But our time frame is nothing to do with the quality. It's to do with our own management of work that we've got.
Yeah. Before you talk, Abby, I just remembered my question for you, Silé, which was about, so I think it's really useful for people to know that it's quite acceptable to submit to more than one agent at the same time. Would you expect them to tell you that they were doing that? Like, is that the kind of etiquette? Because I remember being worried about this when I was submitting, going, well, should I say, should I not? Should I do it one at a time?
I mean, no, it's part of the process, and it's something that every agent will understand. Okay. So it's not, sometimes it can come across in your submission letter as a little bit, well, I've submitted to other agents, so just so you're aware, like I am seeing other people, and that's that can be a bit like, oh, okay. But if like Claire said, if you have got scooped up by someone, or if someone's asked to see the full manuscript, or if there's one agent who you really want to hear back from, and within their time frame of getting back to you, their window, someone else has got back and said they want to represent you, or they want to read your full manuscript, then sending a little email like, oh, I've heard from another agent and they really want to read the full, but I'd love to hear from you, so if you could get back to me within a couple of weeks, that would be great. Because again, all agents will understand that if someone's called in the full manuscript or is offered representation, it can be quite disheartening for an author to just kind of disappear, or to say, oh, well, I'm waiting to hear from another agent, and then not say anything for 3-4 weeks. So as long as you're polite and friendly, there is understanding there that you've submitted to other people as well as us, and if someone's called in the full, or if someone's offered representation, that there's a kind of ticking clock. So
okay, great. Abby, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I was going to add to that, I think I completely stand behind all of that. I think it's just about communication, really. I think the only time it's a problem submitting to multiple agents is when I've had it happen to me that I've been literally writing kind of editorial notes to someone who I've told I'm interested in, and then I've seen on social media them sign with someone else, and it's just such a shame, because it's great for them, and I always like to see a writer progress, even if it's not with me, but it's just time I could have spent on someone else's manuscript, and there is never enough time. I think that's the big thing for agents, that 12 weeks can feel like a really long time, but actually when we're doing all the other things we're doing as part of our jobs, it's not necessarily that we're not really into your book or excited about it, it's just finding time. So I think for writers to be kind of prepared that publishing is a slow and a long game, and it requires a lot of patience from writers.
And then can you maybe talk a little bit about, I'm just thinking about kind of common mistakes that people make, because there must be, I mean, you talked a little bit, Claire, about kind of grammar and typos, and I think those things that sort of get in the way of you accessing the actual writing. So are there any kind of common mistakes that you see again and again that it would be useful for people to just have in the back of their heads when they're submitting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind, picking up typos that I can tell are just, it's when it's consistently, like say somebody's got the punctuation around speech wrong all the way through. I kind of think, oh, that's not, that's not a mistake. That's actually something that they think is right. One thing I say is like point of view is always something that'll come up. So sometimes I'm editing and I think, okay, so I'm in this character's head, or I'm in a couple of characters' heads, and then we might slip into somebody else's just for a page. And I'll be like, actually, we don't need that. So I see quite a lot of people, you know, do that with point of view. And sometimes it's about when people submit and they're not too clear on genre, so they just say literary. And then when I'm reading, I'm kind of like, oh no, actually I can see more of a crime thriller here. I can see a little bit of you know, a genre to work with. And I think the other thing is that when people are too scared to say what they're similar to, and I try and encourage people to say, really tell us who you are. You know, we're not going to think that you're big-headed if you compare yourself to a best-selling author. We want to know who you think you like, where you're going to sit next to on the bookshelf, because we'll be working on a pitch based on that and expanding it further for you. And when you're doing it, be like, I'm like this particular writer, but this is why my story is unique. So get both sides of it.
Nice. And that's one thing I find so difficult to do. But in terms of the genre, I'm kind of interested in that when you said people kind of say, oh, it's literary, but you're thinking it's a genre. Like, have you got any tips on how, because it could just be that people don't know, and, you know, genre is quite a,
yeah.
It sounds like a very fixed category, but I think potentially it is potentially quite fluid. So have you got any tips on how people might work out what their genre is?
Yeah,
or if there is a genre?
I do it when sort of we were looking at marketing and editing for people, is to kind of go onto, you know, online bookstores and see what similar books are categorized as. And
okay.
Just, okay, so this is who I'm like, and they're under historical fiction or they're under psychological thriller. And then, you know, when you're actually looking at publishers and you see who they have who match that writer, you see what that writer's genre is.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm just, something's in my head about, so I was watching the panel yesterday that Andrew McMillan chaired, and it was about marketing and particularly social media for writers. And one of the questions was around, you know, do agents and publishers look for writers who've got some kind of social media presence or profile, and does that affect whether or not you take the work? I can sort of imagine what you're going to say, but I just think it's interesting to know. I think some people feel like, oh God, I've got to have a website and a Twitter feed and an Instagram and whatever. So Abby, do you maybe want to start and say whether that influences it at all, whether it's a useful thing for writers to think about?
Definitely. I can maybe offer some hope, but I mean, you know, as agents, we do have to be realistic, and we do have to always be tuned into what publishers will say, and publishers will be interested on the whole in social media numbers, and they will be a factor, particularly in nonfiction. I've taken things on. I took something on that I sold in the summer, and when I took them on, they had about 1,000 followers on Instagram, and really clear engagement, and people were really tapping into the conversation, and I just thought there's something here. And actually we were able to kind of work with them to grow their social media. That was something that we felt was worth sort of our time to kind of build their presence, and now they have a deal and the publisher will do that more. So, you know, it's not a hard and fast rule. I would definitely you know, I don't think there's one fits rule, and if I really like what someone's saying, I think it's really valid, you know, it's partly where the kind of conversation about underrepresented voices comes in, because not everybody has access to these platforms in the same way. If you're a journalist or you've had certain opportunities, then you have a sort of step up into that already and you're networked in, and not everybody has that. But that doesn't mean they're not saying something really worthy of being shared to a big audience. So I think as agents, we have a responsibility to be alert to and support people who don't necessarily have those big brands already.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the kind of underrepresented thing in a minute, but I just while we're on the kind of practicalities, in terms of submission. So I know, Silé, you do a lot of non-fiction. I'm not sure about you. No, you don't in the minute, do you, Claire? Do you, Abby?
I do, yeah.
You do. So I'm just interested, because my understanding is that the process of submitting for non-fiction is quite different from fiction. So maybe, Silé, do you want to talk a little bit about how that works, just for anyone who's writing a book that isn't a novel?
Yeah, sure. So usually for non-fiction, agents will ask for a proposal and a kind of email that will explain who you are and what you're doing and why this particular book or idea or area is something that you, the writer, should be writing about and turning into a book. And that can vary between agents, but for me, I always ask for a proposal and a synopsis, because it gives me an idea of 9 times out of 10 the non-fiction book's not actually going to be finished, and that's fine, but having a synopsis gives me an idea of where you're going with the project and what you're going to do with it when it is finished. So I like to receive both in the email at the same time. And in terms of followers, and especially for non-fiction books on social media, it is important to have some sort of a presence. Even if that presence is small, it's important to have it and to be working on it, because when it gets to the point that you're submitting to editors are going to want to see engagement, and they're going to want to see people engaging with your ideas and your voice, because with non-fiction it's so voice driven often, and if you don't have that engagement, then it can be something it can just be a bit of a gap, between the audience that you're trying to reach and the book that you're writing can be bridged by social media, especially now. So that's something I'd say to authors: if you're not already working on it, be willing to work on it and be able to show that you are working towards building your following and building your platform and doing things in the area that you're writing on, if you're writing a non-fiction book.
And when you say proposal, can you just elaborate a bit on what a proposal is, or what it looks like, or how long it is?
Sure. So it will look different for every author. I've seen some that are, especially for cookery, that are really well designed and they have pictures and recipes in them, and then ones that are for memoirs might just be a Word document that lays out what the whole story is about, how you're going to approach it, and then a chapter breakdown of the chapters you have already written or plan to write. If there are interviews involved, who you're going to interview or who you've already interviewed. So a proposal it will be specific to your book, but it will generally have an overview of what you're writing, a more specific breakdown of how you're going to approach the topic, why you're the person to write it, and that might be because you have a large platform, or that might be because you have a specific experience, or you've been trained by a certain person or a certain institution, so you have this insight that other people might not have and want to read about. And then some sample chapters, so some writing that you've done either on the topic or for the book specifically, that will give a sense of how you write and what you write.
Brilliant, thank you. Abby, have you got anything to add, or?
Not really, other than that sometimes proposals have been, I've been approached by someone with an article or something that they've written, and they've said, is there a book in this? And so, sometimes that approach with a covering email, we can then have a chat about what that book might be, and then send us a proposal from there. So there are sometimes slightly different ways of coming into non-fiction. Yeah,
brilliant. So we just got about 5 minutes left before questions, and I just wanted to turn to this thing around northern writers, working class writers, underrepresented writers, and just because it seems interesting that I know particularly Clare and Abby, you're not based in London, and have a particular agenda around kind of underrepresented writers. And I'm not quite sure what my question is. My instinct is that things are changing. I think Black Lives Matter, the Common People report that you talked about, there is a growing awareness and I think willingness to change. Does that do you think that's true? Is there, and where is there? Yeah, I'm just interested in kind of where the industry is at the minute, what's happening, and how that is going to relate to the people who are maybe listening, who are thinking, oh yeah, but I don't know about X and I don't have any contacts in London or whatever. Yeah. So just
that's kind of what I'm reassuring people, is that we've had a lot of publishers, commission editors getting in touch with us saying, I'm from the north. It's like a little secret society or something. I'm down here in London and I'm from the north. And you're learning that a lot of people in the past might have had to move down there for careers. But even if they're not northern, we're getting a lot of people getting in touch saying, this is brilliant. We really want to get the underrepresented writers up there. It's been so supportive, and we're getting support ourselves in terms of feedback and why certain pitches are working and why some aren't. And I do feel like it's an exciting time because the publishing industry itself, there's big publishers moving up here like Harper North, things are actually happening, and I think the Common People report was a big part of that. And then we've got you know, organisations like Writing on the Wall in Liverpool, who've always, you know, connected up to London with competitions they've done, and now they're sort of like a really good base for all these writers to come to, and then we are the follow on to connect people. And it's so open and accessible that I think people have thought that, you know, everything has to be sort of, you know, but everyone can relax, because there's a lot of meetings I have with writers or commissioning editors, and our cats are in it, our kids are in it, you know, all kinds of things are going on. Everything is a lot more relaxed than people realise.
Great. Abby, do you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I do generally feel hopeful. I do feel like the conversations are being amplified this year. We're talking about it more. I mean, there's conversations about diversity have gone round and round and round, but there seems more genuine commitment to change. This time, I still think disabled writers are woefully neglected in these conversations. We don't talk enough about, I think disabled writers are often, I don't know, this sort of perception of niche audiences, which I fundamentally believe isn't the case. And I think we need to do more to amplify their voices. I think, you know, it's change in-house in publishing companies, the way that we perceive audiences, the way that publishers think about reaching those audiences, and how as agents we do more to signpost new audiences, different audiences, and really try and be collaborative in doing that.
Brilliant. Silé, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I have loads of thoughts, but the thing that I'll add is that people are hopefully putting themselves out there more. And I mean, from the publishing side, you know, people who work in publishing and understand it and understand how it works are putting themselves out there more to explain it. I mean, like we're doing now, and making sure that we're reaching people who may not necessarily know. And one thing that lockdown's been good for is having more of these events be accessible to so many people. I had someone DM me earlier saying, oh, I've never been able to come to one of these because I haven't been able to travel, so it's just really nice to, you know, be able to log on and watch. So that's really nice as well. And I represent 3 writers from the North who submitted to me through my submissions inbox, and it's really great to be able to work with them and have that connection with them, even though, you know, they're up there and I'm kind of down here. So yeah, it's just really nice to be able to work with a range of people and bring good stories forward, because I think that's what we're all doing. And what makes a good story is normally quite subjective, and I think people are being pushed to be a lot more objective in how they look for things.
Yeah, great. No, it does feel like there's a I mean, like you say, Abby, one might have hoped there'd be a shift earlier, but there have been conversations, but it feels like there is potentially more commitment to that now, which is really exciting. And I think exciting for new writers to feel like actually maybe that wall isn't quite so thick or quite so far away. So I think we just got a couple of minutes before Zoe comes back in. So I'm just thinking maybe you could just think of just one thing that you would really like. So new writers, if they've not submitted to an agent before, they've just written their first novel, like what's the one thing you would like them to know about the agent's role?
I was just trying to, one thing I was going to say is just partly to do with the agent's role is, you don't feel like you have to write your underrepresented background. So if you're going to be writing a novel, place it anywhere. Do you know, do it about any situation and circumstance. Don't feel like we as agents are looking for working class in everything, or we're looking for a particular race or gender or situation. Write what you want to write, and your messages will come through.
I think that's really important, because I think that's one of the worries, isn't it? That actually you just get pigeonholed into, well, you write about X and you write about Y. Yeah, great, thank you. Abby, any thoughts for any new writer?
No, I completely agree with that. I think it's just that the main thing to know about agents is that it's not just the sort of step in and take 15% and do a deal. It's a really, really long-term journey, hopefully, and it's about hopefully more than one book, and it's about kind of all the stages in the process. Yeah,
great. And Silé?
Just to reiterate that your agent should be your advocate, so you should really trust them to know everything that you don't know and to be able to represent you in the publishing space.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. That's been fascinating. Zoe, are you going to come and
there's tons of questions from people.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. That was brilliant panel. So Abby, Jude was asking if you could kind of expand on how you work with disabled writers and how their different requirements are kind of applied in the working practice. If you could say a little bit about that, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think with any of my writers, I tailor the way I work with them to what they need. So, you know, if I have someone who has sort of access issues or needs to work with technology in a different way, then it's just about flexing to that, really. So I think the beginning of any conversation and any author-agent relationship should start with a conversation about what they want out of that relationship, how they want to work, any additional support needs they have. You know, there's all sorts of things. I have clients who just work on completely kind of different not time zones exactly, but, you know, they're night owls. I'm a morning person, and we just adapt to make it workable for everyone. And I think, you know, this year has been so hard, but Zoom and all of this has just made it so much more accessible. Just I can jump onto Zoom with most of my writers pretty easily, which is fantastic.
Amazing, thank you. Mike was asking, I think for all of you, what would your advice be on kind of nudging agents if they've been waiting a while for answers? Just any etiquette advice on that. And he was also asking about kind of if you guys have any tips on writers not being too emotionally invested in any queries that they get for full manuscripts. Because I can imagine you get really excited, and I know in my head I'll be like, oh my god, I'm going to get published like straight away. But if you have any tips on distancing yourself from that, so that's 2 questions. So who wants to go first?
Yeah, sorry, I just fitting in with what I said before about that 12-week time frame. I wouldn't recommend chasing up within that, because, you know, the various reasons I mentioned before about it's other workload, it's the volume of submissions. But feel free afterwards to nudge, because we do have a policy of, we do like to give you some feedback about why we've taken it or why not. And with the full manuscript request, I think we're always very careful to say, yeah, we want to see more, these are the reasons why. And if we then read it and feel like, okay, this might not be for us, there might be a lot of reasons, we might not have the contacts, we might not feel we can do it justice, we will always come back to the author with a reason. So you're never left just with a yes or a no, you're left with something.
Perfect.
And just to add to that, I mean, everyone's window of when they're going to respond is different. Mine's 4 weeks, and so I make a really conscious effort to look at my submissions inbox every day and try to read and respond to at least something in there every day. So if it's gone beyond the window, then that can be a polite email just to say, you know, your website says X amount of weeks and it's been X amount of weeks, so I would love to hear back from you if you had any thoughts or if you had a chance to read it. And just understanding that agents will set their windows depending on what they know they can reasonably achieve within that time, and everyone's different. So it may be that there's exceptional circumstances occurring, and it might be, you know, especially since we've gone into lockdown, I know that a lot of people aren't able to keep up the volume of reading that they were previously, because now they're at home and they, you know, are looking after their children full time as well as working, or as well as trying to manage a team remotely, which can be quite difficult. So depending on what the agency is generally like, you can get a bit of a sense of whether you've gone over the window and whether there's a reason for that.
Absolutely, thank you.
I was going to say on the distancing thing, I don't know if I've got any great tips, but I think for me, because I've had that, you know, sending full manuscripts and thinking, oh, this is going to happen, and then it doesn't. And I think maybe it's that thing about knowing it's a numbers game and kind of having your spreadsheet and going, well, if one comes back, then I just send off another one, kind of thing. And I think also to know that if someone's asking for the full manuscript, then there's a reason that they asked, even if they say no. And there are, like you say, Claire, there are so many reasons why people say no. And I've, you know, had conversations with publishers, you know, who are like, oh my god, I desperately wanted to buy this book, but I couldn't quite get it past sales. And I was thinking, oh, you know, I don't think writers don't necessarily know that there's a lot of passion for books and that there are a multitude of reasons. So I think yes, it's gutting, just be like, you know, be sad and grieve it, but know that there's a reason, that there's you're not barking up the wrong tree. Like, you know, there's something in there that's asking for someone to see all of it. And my other tip would be start a new book, because I feel like if you've got another creative project that is feeding you and nurturing you, that you're excited about, then actually, for me anyway, that can kind of somehow soften the other stuff, because you're like, oh, well, even if it's not happening now, or it can take up to a year more to find an agent, that actually you might as well spend that year writing something else that's brilliant, so that then when you do get the agent, there's something else to get excited about as well. So I would say, yeah, put your creative energies and your emotion into something new, and kind of try and keep this other thing ticking on in the back, and take the not the crumbs, but like, you know, take the positives from really after the whole manuscript in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Abby, did you have anything to add to that one?
I was just going to say on Sarah's comment, it has happened to me where I've taken someone on for not for the book they submitted, but for the book that they were working on whilst they were waiting for. You know, like, I just love the way they wrote, and I was like, I'm not sure about this book. Have you got anything else? And they said, oh, actually, I'm halfway through something new. So yes, definitely kind of keep the creative juices flowing in the way to.
The other thing, and this is not to try and be depressing, is that I think when I first got an agent a long time ago, I was like, brilliant, done it, made it. And she didn't sell that book. And then I wrote another book and she didn't sell that book. And then I wrote another book. And for various reasons now have another agent. But I am really emotionally invested. I was like, I have made it. And then it wasn't the right book at the right time and whatever. And actually, when I look back, I'm like, oh, I'm really glad that my first book is my first book, because I know what it means now to have a book out and to stand by it. But at the time, I was just, devastated, really. So I think it's also knowing that, you know, agents will do everything they can to sell your book, but sometimes it doesn't work. And so I think that thing of keeping writing is so important, because, because that's what you do, because you're a writer, but also it might not work the first time, even if you have an agent. It's not to be depressing.
I think that's really good to know, definitely. Sarah was asking, because she hears that, and I think we all hear that obviously agents get thousands of submissions per year. So other than having a great and well-written book to show you guys, what are the best ways that people can break through the crowd and stand out through your masses and masses of submissions that you go through?
I think, as I was saying, it's if they've kind of done that research and they put together a really good cover letter and a synopsis, and they're telling us, as I think I mentioned, you know, about why they fit in with the market, but also what makes them unique. So I think it's just about like making sure you package it up and that you've done that research into what's selling, but also why yours would sell. I mean, obviously we carry that on and take that on further as your agents, but it's good if you've made that start.
It's also really good to know who you're submitting to and what they want, because it could be the most perfectly packaged and saleable manuscript or proposal in the world. If it's something that specific agent just isn't interested in or doesn't have the knowledge and experience to sell that particular area, then they probably won't take it on, because it's such a personal relationship, even though it is a working relationship. And also when you're an agent, you're pitching constantly. And so if you're not passionate about it enough to pitch it even once, you're not going to be able to pitch it well 100 times and in the way that you need to, because each pitch needs to feel like the first pitch. So it's really important to make sure that your submission list, even though it will be more than one agent, has agents who want that particular thing or are working in that particular area.
Yeah, definitely. Abby, did you?
And can I? Sorry, I was just going to ask Silé, in terms of people finding out that information, is that through websites, on Twitter, etc.? Like, what tips would you give people to work if they're feeling like, oh, but I don't know how to find out what an agent wants?
Yeah, so a lot of agents, most agents will have their submission guidelines or wish list, or, you know, everyone calls it something slightly different, but essentially a page on the website somewhere where they say what they're looking for, the kinds of things they've done previously, or the kind of list that they're building up. And also you can see on different places, like the bookseller is really good for this, Publishers Marketplace is really good for this, finding deals they've already done, so you can kind of get a sense of what they're selling at the moment or have sold previously, so you know, okay, my book is in that area. Like if you're writing, I don't know, romance, then you can see who's selling romance, so you can have an idea of what, you know, what they're doing and what they've done in the past.
Great.
Amazing. There are a few people asking about poetry, and I don't know if any of you guys have represented poetry in the past or work with anyone who represents poetry. I think people were mainly wanting to know if agents were a thing for poetry and how you might work with poetry. Have any of you got any experience?
I haven't.
I do work with some poets, but they are also working on longer form projects as well. I think, poetry is a really, really important bit of the publishing landscape, and it feeds so much of the kind of wider culture. It's unfortunately not massively high earning, which is not to say that would be the only motivation for an agent, but if an agent doesn't feel that they can add that much, then they might not feel that it's any advantage to the author to have an agent. But I think in terms of a kind of a wider career context, it can be really interesting to work with poets.
Yeah. I'm also wondering whether there's a short story question in there as well, potentially. I could just as another kind of form that's sort of not, that a lot of people do and work with, but I don't know, but sits maybe differently with different agents. Don't know. Sorry, I keep butting in with my question.
No, that's great, because we don't do short stories and poetry at the moment because I feel like we're not experienced enough in those areas. We've been editors for those types of work, but we haven't actually built up the pitching relationships. So that's the only reason we don't at the moment. In the future, if we felt like we had more experience and we knew people in the publishing industry, then we would definitely take them on.
I think that was a great question to ask, Sarah. Thank you. I think the general advice from other speakers from the conference has also been to kind of, for shorter form stuff at the moment, to look at independent presses and submission windows from the smaller presses who have the capacity to look at shorter form.
And the other thing that because I was working with a short story writer recently and was gathering information, and the other tip that I was given was to submit to competitions and to try and, because the because the person I was writing with was like, well, if I submit to a competition, can I still submit to a publisher? And she was like, absolutely, because if you submit with 5 winning stories, actually that gives you a profile that makes it easier for them to sell. So I think that knowing that you can send out to multiple places, but that doesn't that helps rather than hinders sending to publishers as well.
Definitely. Abby, were you going to say something?
I was going to say exactly what Sarah said.
Right. There was also someone asking about writers whose first language isn't English approaching agents in the UK. I don't know if you have had any instances of that, and whether you have any specific advice for people whose first language isn't English, but they are writing in English for an English audience.
Then I would say that if your English is at a point that you can write and it's readable, then absolutely submit, and say that in your submission letter. It like, I can't remember who said, I think it was you, Abby, it's all about communication. So if you're communicating where you are and this is your vision, this is what the book is, and then submitting those pieces of writing that can get a sense of what you are doing, that's absolutely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. It will again depend on the individual agents.
Absolutely. I have a client whose English isn't her first language, but and she communicated that to me, and it was useful to know in the context of her having written books that were published in China, which is where she's originally from. But apart from that, I'm judging on the quality of the writing. So that's where it starts, really.
Yeah, we're exactly the same, because we have worked with writers who, in our editing roles, where English isn't their first language, and we just communicate about that, and it doesn't really make a difference. It's us looking at the story.
Perfect. Someone was asking, is it harder, because this is what she's heard, is it harder to be published if you are a first-time author who is older? Is that something that you guys have found generally?
I haven't found that, because we have all ages submitting to us. I think it's the quality of the writing and the story, because I'll have someone, it doesn't really affect who they should write about as well, because I've had people who are older writing for younger characters writing older characters. I haven't found it's made a difference what age the author is.
I think
it can be quite, sorry. It's quite off-putting sometimes, because I know a lot of things are 16 to 25 or under 30, or so. I know that looking at things, it can be a bit off-putting, but it doesn't mean, if you're writing and the subject area you're writing in is about whatever it's about, that's what's important, not your age with that.
Yeah, it's good to know that you as agents have no bias. I think there's just this preconception that there's this idea of the exciting debut author who's only like 20 something and has loads of books because it's amazing that they've done this by this age. But no, it's good for you guys to clarify that that's not necessarily anything that you are looking for.
And you could be a debut author at any age. You know, as an agency, we represent an author who definitely wasn't 20 when her debut was sold, and it sold all over the world, and you know, it was a really amazing book. So it's again about the story. You can be 65, 70, 80, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think that brings us to time. So sorry if for people whose questions haven't been answered, I tried to choose ones that would kind of cover a wider basis. But thank you so much to my panel. You've all been absolutely brilliant. So Clare Coombes, Abby Fellows, Silé Edwards and Sarah Butler. Yeah, thank you all so much. And this is available to play back if anyone needs it on YouTube. And our next panel is same time tomorrow, Writers' Inspirations and How They Use Them, with 3 authors, Luke Brown, Marina Benjamin and Monique Roffey are going to be talking to us. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.